One of the things that I've heard over and over again is how in the world can people simply just believe Fox News or CNN? How is it that they just accept all of that and say that's true? Well, we're going to spend a couple seconds looking into that, actually be a couple of minutes, but we're going to spend a couple of minutes looking into that to understand what's going on. So underneath all of that is a couple of things that are hardwired in our brains, how we see the world, how we interact with the world. So this is going to sound like a strange jump, but for just a second, imagine that you're sitting in a restaurant and all of a sudden out of the corner of your eye you see something scurrying across the floor. What do? Your eyes cut towards that, you move towards that, and what do the people around you do? They all shift their attention that way as well, because we are wired to look for threats. We are wired to be aware of changes and the things around us, whether it's something that we see or whether it's something that we hear or something that we feel. We're wired to be alert to those things because our minds and our bodies are constantly processing millions, if not billions, of pieces of information every moment. But your brain filters out those things which seem to be just a little bit out of the ordinary that are a potential threat to us. That's just the way we're wired. Moms have this incredible thing, we call it, oftentimes they'll call it mother's intuition. But have you ever been sitting around a mom when she said, it's too quiet, right? How can it be too quiet? It's too quiet. That means the kids are doing something right. She's on to something because that perception is up there. So we're wired to do that. We're wired to be aware of potential threats that are coming towards us. The other thing that we're wired to do is to move towards a state of being confident. As a parent or as just a society member, you hear regularly people talk about the importance of self-esteem in children. And really that's a statement about confidence, building confidence in an individual. And we talk about that regularly, that successful people are often people who are very self-confident. Well, where does self-confidence come from? It comes from this unique, hardwired thing that we like to agree with ourselves. We like to agree with ourselves. That means that when we have a belief about something or our understanding of the world and information comes in, we want those two things to align. And the more those things align, the more confident we are, the more self-esteem that we have, that we believe in ourselves. And so we teach our kids as they're growing up that if they're being successful at something, that they need to, like, this is good, hey, you're great at that. And that they need to ignore people who are saying things that don't line up with that, right? So if you've just won at a track meet and somebody comes up and says you're not very fast, obviously you would disregard that information because it doesn't line up. You're not agreeing with yourself. If you accept that, you're creating this disagreement. And so we like to do that. We want to agree with ourselves. We have our way that we see the world, the things that we hold as these are our beliefs, and we have other information that comes in, and we like those two things to agree. And it's really interesting when those two things agree, we automatically, our brain says to ourselves, this is true. We call it truth. That can become a challenge. So we have these two things that would seem to be opposing in some ways, that we're always on the lookout for potential threats, and we're always looking for things that confirm what we already believe. And so we do get caught in this bit of tension. And that's where watching the news and having a source of news kind of comes into play. One of the things that we realized as people groups a long time ago was that everybody couldn't stay on high alert all the time. We would just be stressed and distracted, and we wouldn't have been able to come together and actually make things happen. So we appointed certain people to be guards and protectors, and also to evaluate what we needed to know about what's happening out there and bringing that to our attention so that we could figure out how do we protect ourselves or defend ourselves if need be. And so those appointed people brought in information, which we call news, and we would evaluate that and figure out what we needed to do with that. And early on, there were just a couple of points of news, and that came in, and so we would look at that. But one of the things that we used to be willing to do was that when news came in that didn't agree with our beliefs, we were willing to examine both. We would say, am I thinking about this correctly? Do I have the right facts and information? Because this news, this piece of information that's come in, contradicts that. Or we would say, you know what, that piece of information you're bringing in doesn't line up with kind of everything I know here. And so we would struggle with those two. And it was an uncomfortable place to be in, but we would do that on a regular basis. We might talk to some friends, get some more information, but we would process those kind of things. Now we're in a situation with this 24-hour news cycle to where we don't question that piece of news that's coming in. We simply find a different piece of news from a different source. We change the channel. We click the button. We go to this other person, and so what we do now is we seek out, because of that wiring to where we want to agree with ourselves. If you say something that doesn't agree with me, then I'm going to find somebody who does, and they're going to go on and on and on. There's going to be more and more agreement, more and more agreement, more and more truth, right? So that person's telling me the truth, and we're going to talk about what truth really is in just a minute, but we say that person's telling me the truth. And then the other thing that feeds into is our constant awareness of threats around us. And so we're perceiving the news and that truth in ways that we're trying to figure out, how is this a threat to me? And if you listen to most of the news that's out there right now, that's what it's talking about. Here's what's happening, and this is how this is a threat to you and to your loved ones. And so it engages us, and we stay kind of worked up into this whole thing. The challenge with that is being able to step back and say, okay, just because I agree with it doesn't mean it's truth. I need to figure out, does this make logical sense? What they're saying, does it make logical sense? And is there factual evidence to back that up, especially in this world of lobbying beyond just the nugget of truth? And I went into detail on that in a previous video if you want to go back and catch that one. And being able to realize that there's the sense of my truth because it lines up with my beliefs. And that's a whole nother weird thing that's kind of developed, right? Is you'll hear people talk about my truth, your truth, her truth, their truth. And really what we're saying in that example on those particular things is that their experience leads them to equate these things as being true. And I may not have the insight to be able to understand how all that works. But that doesn't mean that it is logical or factually accurate that they believe that. So there are times that we need to be able to call out someone and go, yeah, you may say that's your truth, but it's not logical or factually accurate on that. And we really need to be able to do that for ourselves. Just because our news source tells us something doesn't mean that we need to assume that it's true just because it feels true and feels right. We need to be able to look at our beliefs. We need to look at that information and compare those two. Personally, the way that I found to do that is through taking in multiple news sources. And so I will spend time, typically not like I did before where it's just all in on one for a while, but I'll bounce between a couple of them on a particular story. And one of the things that I regularly find is that there is more of an explanation on the story. Like I'll react to a headline. There was a very recent one that was the Trump administration was going to require the new, I think, Health and Human Services to get through all the regulations that are on the books before they implement any new regulations. And the headline was written in a way that led me to think, wow, the Trump administration is really trying to mess up the Biden administration at a time when they're dealing with COVID, because they're not going to be able to do anything other than focus on that. And the first many lines on that. But as I got down deeper into the story, and as I went to other places of the story, this was actually something that has been being proposed for quite a while. It wasn't a post-election thing. In fact, it was proposed back when they all assumed that Trump would be the president, and let's not go down that road, but when they assumed that Trump would be the president in the next cycle too. So they were really imposing something upon themselves, not on a different administration. But the headline and the first supporting information was all pitched as if this was a vindictive thing against the Biden presidency and Biden appointees coming in on that. And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't clicked and looked at other stories to understand more of the background that's going on. Now, ultimately, back to that question, is that a threat to me personally? No, it was just an interest story. So it is important that when we feel threatened by what we hear in the news, that we're willing to click on other news sources and find out what the truth is, and to actually figure out, is this something that affects me? Is this a threat to me? Or is this just stuff that's going on out there that really doesn't impact me and I can ignore? Because the truth is, we can't pay attention to everything that's going on because there's so much going on right now. I hope that this has been helpful for you in this whole conversation about how to engage the news and how to process the news. If it has been helpful to you, I ask that you like and you share it so that other people can benefit it from well. And if you'd like to know more about me, you can check out my link tree at 218matt.com.